My name is Paul Fahy and I'm the Artistic Director of Galway International Arts Festival. And I'm joined in the festival gallery today with Enda Walsh, playwright and director, with whom we've worked for many a long year. And we're here today specifically to have a chat about the ongoing immersive theatre installations, Rooms, which we've been working on together since 2014. So Enda, you're very welcome to Galway once again.
Thank you.
It's great to have you
back.
Be here. So Rooms have become quite the thing, haven't they? Like, it started off as a small idea in 2014 and they've just sort of, grown year on year. We've managed to bring them together in various different assemblages in various different places around the world. So can you talk to me a little bit initially maybe about, I read, you wrote this really lovely preview piece, I think it was, an introduction piece when we were in the Barbican last year about your dad had a furniture shop and you and your brother used to sometimes help him deliver things, and you were always very interested in going into other people's spaces and seeing all these kind of new environments. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe how that kind of sort of influenced your way of thinking in terms of character maybe and spaces?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I was like many, probably like a lot of artists. I was quite a sort of I was very sort of sensitive little boy, and I had a very intelligent, precocious younger brother who sort of completely outshined me very, very quickly. And I was the second last in a big family. So I was, I felt as if, I spent a lot of time, like in my head and things like that. And but as I got older and into my sort of teenage years, my dad had a furniture business, and we used to, on a Saturday, we used to deliver furniture when the van men were too drunk to sort of drive the van. And but I was a young teenager with my sort of older brothers. But you would come into people's houses and be in their houses and be in their spaces, in their living rooms or whatever. And that was a very as a young kid, about sort of 13, it was really, really interesting to be in someone else's house and to feel the sort of, the history and the presence of people there and who that family was. So, and as a playwright, I guess, or a writer, you have to sort of, jump into the atmosphere and the subtext of what's happening in a situation. So sort of sitting alone in someone's, kitchen while my dad's doing business in the living room, with the parents or whatever, and waiting for him to come in, and being in that space, wondering, who those people were, has really sort of informed a lot of my work, I must say, but particularly, the Rooms thing. And it wasn't until we did the first room, Room 303, that I realized that, which was, a hotel room of, they're very sort of strong spaces to be. They feel very, atmospheric, and and we dig deep as a person. We're trying to sort of learn what those spaces are and how they sort of speak to us and all the rest.
Mm-hmm. And so when you kind of start off, obviously Room 303 was written before kind of the idea came about that they would be in these sort of white cubes. For those who don't know them, they're a series of white cubes that are about 5 meters by 5 meters, sort of like domestic room, a little bit larger than domestic room size, and they're normally set in a gallery kind of context, and people open a door and they walk into this kind of environment. So it is, I suppose, it's a different engagement with an art form than, say, theatre would be, because there's the whole idea of the fourth wall, and you're up close and personal, almost kind of confined, and there is maybe a sense of confinement or psychological confinement about some of the characters that we meet along the way there. But do you have a kind of a different sort of mindset now when you start, now that you know that you're writing for that framework?
I think I do. I mean, I'm conscious of, like I've said this to you before, as I get older, the larger plays and the theatre stuff, I'm much more interested in form and structure. And when I was a younger writer, I was really interested in language and character. And these actually sort of are I allow myself an opportunity also to go back to the fundamentals of why I became a writer when I was like in my later teenage years when I started writing. And it's an engagement with with the character and with how the character is talking. And in the case of these, I guess, in terms of the sort of the mindset of, I know that they're all thematically sort of linked. They all seem to be linked to, I guess, isolation and all of that, and being in a space and in a box in a character's place. It allows you as a listener or as a sort of an experiencer of that to connect in, like if you want to, with your own sort of, with the spaces and the isolation within your own sort of self and your own life and all of that sort of carry on. So, I mean, thematically, it buzzes around that sort of idea.
Mm. And there's sort of so much in them. Like they each last in around 13 minutes, but like sometimes when you read them, they're almost like, you know, an epic novel, because you paint this picture of, say, for example, Room 303, which you've mentioned, which was the very first one. It was a man, either died or he's about to die. He was kind of leaving the space, and he was reflecting back on his time on Earth. But you really had a whole sense of the life he'd kind of led, and that's a huge one to capture within
it's sort of
a short
like,
few pages.
But I remember when I was in Cork years ago, and I was walking over Patrick's Bridge, and I think it was the time just before Disco Pigs or something like that. So, and I was walking across the bridge, and I stopped dead, and I felt this, you know, sort of pressure in my chest, and a real sort of hollowing out of myself, where I felt so tiny and insignificant in relation to the world, which we are, right? And it was a punch. It was a real bang. And I know what these rooms, it's a very, very sort of significant moment in their lives that they're feeling, and that's the connection that because a lot of the time, we sleepwalk through our life. We're probably not at the moment because it's extreme, and but we're sort of dulled in many other ways. But a lot of the time we do just go by. Our days and weeks go by us. But moments of real significance do happen, of course, in our lives, and they're the moments, I guess, with these characters that I want to hear about. So they're both. They might be reflections on isolation, but within that, there's either sort of like real implosion and defeat, or there's something positive.
That's survival.
Survival, yeah. A lot of them are that. I mean, like the saddest one is the waiting room. We talked about that, and it's like, and it's so tragic. And yet that woman sort of finds it within herself, and she's completely broken to begin to sort of to carry on, through that grief. Yeah. I mean, that's
that was such a profoundly moving one, and of course that was voiced by the great Aoife Duffin.
Yeah.
But the latest one in the series, the Changing Room, which features Marty Ray's voice, that's kind of more of a transformational story, and perhaps there's not a little bit more. There's definitely more hope kind of offered towards the end of that. But do you want to talk a little bit about that character?
Well, it needed to be. I mean, it's sort of. I think about. I mean, look, lockdown and the whole thing. And I know in my piece, of course, it does refer to lockdown, but in sort of obliquely. But we all know what the hell we're talking about. And that moment of, self-isolation, a lot of people have actually, and the giddiness and the strangeness of that time, a lot of people found within themselves reserves, or maybe it was actually just the shock of it, that, there was a lot of sort of reinvention that went on. And like in that sort of cocooning sort of caterpillar to butterfly sort of story really interests me, and I thought, actually I should really write about that. And I needed it at the time. When you talked to me in late March, April, I just finished a commission, and I came out of the commission, and I was like, and I thought, oh my God, right, okay. So and I thought, well, I should write something about a man who finally sort of who finally gets what he always wanted, and and it's it has humor, of course, but there's a real in another point of view, it would be a very, very sort of sad story, but I wanted that character to have within that sort of humor, that drive to actually just keep on, one foot after the next. And he sort of finds love, which is great, to find love story in a pandemic sort of character.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's kind of just full of possibility and what's going to happen to him over the next while. That's great. And that one, of course, that's set in an outdoor changing space. So somewhere like Salthill in Galway or Blackrock in Dublin or whatever. And I'll talk about the rest of the creative team in a moment, who were so kind of key to all these as well. But so looking back at over the 7 of them, is there any of them that sort of kind of sticks with you on a more regular basis, or a character that you kind of go, God, I wonder what happened to them, or that you kind of care for a little bit more? I say that because I know I have one.
No, they all have sort of, I mean, I'm sort of shocked, because the thing about it is that, and the way that we've done them is that we, they're, I guess I became a playwright because I was interested in people, and there's nothing like meeting a stranger and finding that connection, like in yourself, and that empathy that you have for them. And these people, it's a sort of shock for me, you know, that when they arrive and they come out, and then we make them, we voice them, we put them in this room, and then they exist in that space, and we get to sort of engage with a moment. It's a very significant moment in their life. And I sometimes, I mean, and I feel this about the larger work too, you know, I'm unsure a lot of the time about what my sort of engagement was with them, despite the fact that I wrote them. But they do happen, you know, is the thing. And you find them. And then and within that, and I told you the other day, came up on my headphones. It was on a sort of like on a shuffle, and I was like, oh right, and the bathroom came up. Paul Reed sort of voiced, and I was like, I couldn't remember a lot of it, and I was really sort of shocked to hear it, and the speed of which it happened. I think it's the changing atmospheres, and when we begin to sort of see them all together, and when we show them the Barbican with 5 rooms, it's the changing atmospheres that an audience sort of have to experience within that time of going one to the other, and that thing also of just, you know, I mean, in theatre you do have to turn off your phones and all that. But similarly, that you just give a little bit of time, you give 13 minutes to the meditation, but the concentration of that character in that particular sort of time. But there is a feeling of suspension, you know, that it's not the end. It's sort of like we just grasp them at a particular moment. And so the piece has to be concentrated, and you feel as if, oh wow, they're still out there, apart from the poor woman in the kitchen who imploded. But apart from her, everyone's sort of still out there.
Poor Eileen Walsh's character that you referred to there. And the one that I'm actually probably asked the most about, I think, is by people who've seen a lot of them maybe, is the girl in a girl's bedroom, which is voiced by Charlie Murphy. And it's interesting, like, to hear the kind of the care that people have kind of seem to still have about her, you know, 5 years later or whenever.
I guess it's a child.
And it's a child, but then she's walking. We hear her when she's an adult. But a few people have said to me, "Do you think she's okay?" Do you think she's okay?
Yeah, no, I don't know where she is, but again, it's a very sweet, like, well, it's a story about it's, you know, when I was a kid, when I was a 5-6-year-old, I had a lot of 5-6-year-olds had fantasies about running away and what running away was being like. And in our neighbourhood, it seemed to be something like in the 70s that we would chat about, you know, people running away. Did you hear about this? So, and I mean, that's where that came from. Yeah. That thing about, like, you know, but then a woman, you know, who leaves her house at 6 and then doesn't stop walking until she's 25. Now we can do that in theatre. We can sort of allow that character to sort of be, and also sort of exist within 13 minutes. You know, a whole life, you know, like in that time.
Yeah, it is incredible how much of a picture they kind of paint of the essence of somebody's being, I think. Yeah. And girls, like, normally, actually the other interesting thing I really like about them as well is that, you know, because you are kind of in a closed space with people. We're in COVID times now as we speak, so we're not really encouraging people to kind of, you know, touch the objects and whatever in changing room, and that's a little bit less prop heavy and whatever, but generally people are encouraged to kind of open drawers and kind of, you know, get a kind of a sense of everything that's within the sort of spaces. But with being in the spaces, and especially in the girl's bedroom, I thought, you know, you had 4 strangers who were in that kind of room with you, and you had all this sort of like the debris of a child's life, like left all over the place, and this haze of pink. And it was interesting watching how people engaged with some of the you know, the items and the, you know, I remember once going in and seeing the girl's school uniform had been folded and left very neatly, and it was just kind of heartbreaking, that sort of gesture that they had done something to kind of help and care for this.
I think it's sort of, you know, well, you know, when you're in your child's room and you're an adult, these are really sort of evocative spaces, and also, you know, it fills you with dread as soon as you step into a white box into a child's bedroom. Your sense of sort of you begin to, you know, as an audience, you begin to bring your drama, really your own story, you know, really, really quickly to the party. And it's, you know, it's our job to sort of fight against that and offer something else, or maybe not, or else ride where they're going and just, you know, eventually bring them up.
And we talk a little bit about Office 33A, because that was, like, you know, fascinating as well. You walk down this corridor of a very kind of, you know, clean, sort of dull, contemporary kind of office space, and then you opened this door into what was almost like a time capsule from, you know, decades ago, and it was almost like a prison cell in some ways. And it was like that, you know, that the stories and the memories of that space had been just sealed off, and then all of a sudden we excavate them.
Yeah, see, this is the thing about the rooms. And the more you can go anywhere with them, and I mean, that was really interesting to go, all right, sort of like it's a forgotten space in what feels like a very institutionalized, clean building, and it's a locked door of which we have access to. And then within that locked door, there's a completely broken, fractured voice coming at us, trying to sort of bring, you know, his last moments together in that space. And again, a love story, a weird love story between him and this woman who worked in this building, and us trying to, I mean, they're incredibly, you can go anywhere within that sort of white box. You can, and also the, from a design point of view, I mean, the difference, you know, it's just, there's just a gazillion rooms that you can go into, that you can sort of experience. It's you know, it's endless.
Yeah. Here's to many more. I just want to just mention our creative team as well, because they bring so much to the project. Tony Reid, who's the master carpenter and great construction chap. Jerry Sweeney, who's the scenic painter, who's worked on all of them. And Ciara O'Reilly, who's our great props master, can find anything anywhere. And Adam Simons, who works as lighting designer, and he's also the production manager on them. And then in the earlier rooms, we'd worked with Pete Nelson a little bit as well. So, and I just love working with them, because they're such a, they really feels like a collaborative kind of an experience.
It's great, and it was wonderful in Barbican to sort of see. And also, I mean, their work is so fine. It's really, really excellent. And yeah, it's a lovely thing to do. Like, you know, we've had 7 years of it to do every year, to reconnect with those people and to talk about where we're at and where the rooms are at, and sort of know, well, we can, you know, I don't know, I mean, whenever I sit down to write it, I think, oh, this will be a really good offer to the guys. You know, like in terms of, well, what do you think? You know?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, they've been a joy to make, and let's keep on making them.
Yeah.
Keep on going. Seven down. So thank you very much for being here today, and we look forward to the story continuing.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.